Welcome, everybody, to AI Best Practices, Ethics, and Security for Faculty. I'm Jesse Spencer-Smith, and I'm Chief Data Scientist at the Data Science Institute. Glad that you were all able to join us today, or glad that you're watching the recording. We're going to be talking today just in brief about some of the most important things to keep in mind when using generative AI. The concerns that you'll have and the issues you want to be aware of are different from pretty much any previous issues that you might have run into. So in this 45-minute session, I'm going to be discussing the essential best practices, touching on safety and security. We won't be going into all of the uses and applications of AI, but please do watch our videos or join us for other workshops for that. I'll have a link at the end of this with a way to find out about the rest of our workshops and also to sign up for our newsletters to find out about everything that's going to be going on. But for this session, really the goal is that at the end of the session, you'll have additional insight into how generative AI works and the ethical considerations around the training. You'll be able to make good choices about using them. The larger issues around ethics around AI models it's extensive. We won't have time to really go into that here. We will have other workshops and sessions on that. There are deep and profound ethical issues around the training and the use of the models. We'll be just touching on really more personal ethics and also the implications of the manner of training of the models. First, a little bit of terminology. How many people, when you're talking about AI, do you call it Chat GPT? You say, well, I'm gonna use Chat GPT. Yep. So a lot of people do. Chat GPT is like the Coke of generative AI. So even though there are many other things other than Chat GPT, we tend to call it all Chat GPT. But know that generative AI, these are transformer models. They're called transformer decoder models. There are a number of different types. So this ChatGPT is just the most well-known and the first. But we also have Bard, we have Bing, we have Claude, we have Llama, we have dozens of different models that all do generative AI. So today, we're going to be talking about generative AI. We're going to be talking about hallucinations, bias, security, and ownership. So I got to tell you, I ran into a problem when I was first preparing for this workshop. I wanted to give you a really good example of the model of ChatGPT in particular, clearly hallucinating, and that means making up factual information. So I wanted to chat GPT and I said, what books has Jesse Spencer-Smith written? I haven't actually written any books. So book chapters, certainly, papers, but not entire books. Previously, when I did this, the model gave me a couple of very nice titles having to do with data science and AI. But now, when I run this, it says Jesse Spencer-Smith is not an author that I'm aware of. My knowledge is up to date only until September 2021. So if he has written or published any books after that time, I have not. I wouldn't have that information. All right, so one of the early examples that I had of hallucination isn't showing it anymore. All right, so I tried to see maybe what I could do is ask about an author that's written a lot of different, and then pressing it and see if I can get it to start generating names of books that the author had not written. So I chose Kurt Vonnegut. Give me a list of 10 books Kurt Vonnegut's written. Came up with lists, and I remember all of these. I asked for 10 more. I remember most of these. I think they're all there. Then I asked for 10 more. Okay, now I recognize some of these. Some of these I'm not as familiar with. I did a spot check and they were there. But I'm thinking we're getting to the end here. So I asked for another 10 and it said, I apologize, but I seem to have provided you with a comprehensive list. So not hallucinating here. So maybe the models don't hallucinate anymore. Well, I tried the following. Please give me citations for scientific papers concerning in-context learning and generative AI models. It's my area of interest. I have a wide number of areas of interest in AI, but this one in particular. And now it generates really quite a few, and these are great sounding. I kind of remember some of these titles as well. The years didn't look quite right, but I thought it was pretty good. So turns out actually that this is a great example of hallucination. So these articles, the names appear often, but they weren't published by those people. The people are people who publish in generative AI, but not associated with those papers. The workshop names are correct generally, but everything's mixed and matched, and some stuff is just completely made up. So, first of all, yes, hallucinations still happen. And second of all, they don't happen in all instances now. So where does this come from? So first of all, let's answer the question, where hallucinations come from? And then let's go ahead and talk about why we don't see hallucinations in some cases, but we see them in others. And then we'll also talk about why hallucinations really just throw us for a loop, and how they cause us so much trouble. Okay, so where do hallucinations come from? Well, it's important to understand how the generative AI models work, and that is, in general, and what you're looking at here is just an overview of a decoder transformer, which is what generative AI models are, by and large. We have the prompt, and then we have the response. And what's happening here is you put in the prompt, and the job of the model is to always generate a next word, more technically, the next token. And the way that it creates a response or a longer series of responses is it keeps on generating that. So it generates a token, a word, and then given all the prompt that you'd given it, plus that additional token, it generates the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's what we call an auto-regressive model. And really what it's doing is it's producing a probability distribution over all the next possible words. So it's returning a probable response, a plausible response. That's what we train it to do. That's what it's going to do. So let's think about the instances where we start getting into trouble with this. And that's when we are asking it for specific information. And the reason why we get into trouble here is that all the knowledge of the models is encoded here in what's called the decoder stack. The decoder stack is not a database. As a matter of fact, it's a couple of different pieces of deep learning architecture. One of them is called the attention mechanism. The other one is a feed-forward network. Feed-forward networks store representations. They store associations. They're not a database. So the way that I characterize this is that these models have a representation of everything they've been trained on. So the internet, books, articles, chapters, newspapers, but it's a fuzzy JPEG. It's not going to be perfect all the way down. The most important, the largest features are there and will be represented. So when I asked it for Kurt Vonnegut, it's run across Kurt Vonnegut a lot in many different writings. And so that was large enough of a footprint that it was able to correctly generate those books and to say, this is what he's written, and to get it right. So why did it get this wrong? Well, because, first of all, its training, that you saw just a moment ago, ended in September 2021, so it doesn't know anything newer. So if it generates anything newer, it is definitely something that it's simply made up. And these are specific details. How many people have discussed BART, denoising sequence-to-sequence pre-training for natural language generation, translation, and comprehension? This is not on the top reader list of a lot of people. So no, it doesn't have a good representation of that. But I was asking it to do something I probably should not have been asking it to do. I was asking it to act like Google, like a lookup. But it's not a lookup because remember, it is only built like this. It has, out of the box, it has no access to the internet. Okay, so now we understand a little bit more, but why did it get me right? Because shouldn't it have generated books about me? Well, it turns out there's another kind of training that you can do with these models that has to do with what's called alignment. And so this is the preferences that we have for the types of responses we want from the model. So one of the things is that we like the models to be polite. We like them to be safe. We like them to not be harmful. So for example, if somebody asks for really dangerous information, I would like to know how to build a bomb. What we want the model to do is to not do and say, certainly, I can tell you the steps. Instead, what we want the model to do is say, no, I'm not allowed to share that kind of information. So now what's happened with the models is there's been alignment for when you have questions like this, where it's, specific information and it knows it has no information on it, then it now has been trained to say that it doesn't know. Now, this is different because it's very clear it doesn't know me. It doesn't have anything on me. And so it says, oh, I do not know. This is when I was trained. If anything has been written since this time. So it was trained to do this. It was guided to give this kind of a response. But there was no guidance for my very specific type of response here, which was give me a list of citations. So it generated the most plausible, the most probable kinds of responses, regardless of whether those actually existed or not. So lesson here is don't use the models as Google. It is going to generate a response unless it's been specifically trained not to do so. So that alignment is mitigation. It doesn't solve it. And you're going to see that again and again here, that the problems with generative AI can be mitigated and how we interact with them can mitigate problems, but there's always the possibility that incorrect information is generated. So when I introduce generative AI into my classes, I tell my students that it is their job to be critical consumers. So they have to use it properly, and even then, always check. So I say the generative AI can really help them learn. It is their own personalized tutor that they can tell their background to. I've had this class, but not this class. I know calculus, but I've never had differential equations. Explain this gradient descent to me, please. And it will do a great job. It's your own personalized tutor that happens to be slightly delusional. So check what it says, double check, ask it to double check, but just don't depend on it being correct. But let's take a look at that alignment thing. Now let's talk about ways to improve these models. One way to improve and to further mitigate is to allow the models to do a lookup on the internet. So you'll see this with certain models like Bing Chat from Microsoft, which is built on GPT-4, also by OpenAI. What they've done is they very closely tied this to Bing search. So if you have a prompt and the model processes the prompt and it finds that it needs additional information, you've mentioned something that it does not have a lot of information about, it will make a query. It will do a Bing search and then take the results of that Bing search and put that back into the prompt, sort of behind the scenes. Put that information back into the prompt so it can do a better job of answering factually. Now, does this actually fix the problem? No, not really. It is still a generative AI model, but now it has in its prompt added in by itself factual information that it can draw on in order by which to answer your questions. So that is mitigation. Let's return a little bit to how the model responded better when I asked it about me with that alignment. So to get technical here, that alignment is called reinforcement learning from human feedback. So At some point, the model was trained with something along the lines of, tell me about books that Jack Smith has written. And then humans looked at the response and said, you know, don't respond in that way. If you have no information, the preferred response is going to be, I do not have information. I was trained, my training ended. The response that we saw earlier. This is another kind of training of the model, but again, it only shapes the model. These are not hard guidelines. It's very difficult to build hard guidelines that prevent the model from hallucinating. And actually, we almost need to rethink the term hallucinating. Not hallucinating, it's doing what we trained it to do. It's just that it's not what we want it to do. We need to ask it to, we need to ask different questions other than just factual questions. All right, any questions so far about this portion where we saw the model being shaped, the responses, and where hallucinations come from? Please feel free to put this into the chat or just simply unmute yourself and to ask. And feel free to ask questions at any time. Then let's talk about bias. So this points out another problem that we have. I mentioned that the model stores everything that it learns in these decoder stacks, which means that it was trained. And we mentioned that it was trained from lots of different information. For some of these largest models, it's trillions of words, trillions, which means a lot of this information comes from many different sources, including the internet. As a matter of fact, that forms a large part, different sources on the internet. So let's think about what this means for the model. The model's understanding of the world is shaped by what it's been trained on. That's its full representation of everything that it knows. So let me ask you this. Have you ever run across anything on the internet that was incorrect? Have you ever run across, once or twice? Once or twice. Have you ever run across anything on the internet that was offensive or very troublesome? So Linda.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to do a thumbs up and somehow it showed up as a hand. I was just answering yes to your question. I didn't have a
thumbs up on misinformation on the internet.
It does happen. Yep.
Absolutely. Quite a bit, right? And
yep.
And the kind of responses that you get on the internet when you're doing chats, right, are not always the chats that we want to have, right? If you point out that someone is incorrect on the internet, their response is likely to be negative, right? And that's not what we want the models to do at all. So that's one of the things that we do with this reinforcement learning from human feedback. If someone corrects you, respond politely. This is part of the shaping of what we get from the internet, but the basics of what it's learned is still there, right? So all of the bias, which might be in what it was trained, the information that was trained on, it learned it. And just by reshaping the responses, it's not necessarily going to get rid of that. So let's test it out and let's see what kind of perhaps biased response we might be able to get out of this thing. So, okay, so we're going to do, here's one that worked for me before. And what I did was I said, describe the life in the day of a woman. And let's see what it says. And then we're going to say, describe the life in a day of a man. And we're going to see if it's any different. It's important to approach descriptions of individuals based on gender with sensitivity to avoid perpetuating stereotypes. I'm betting that there's been some reinforcement learning from human feedback here, that this has been aligned. Let's see, it's a day, work responsibilities, personal growth, community engagement, might participate in community events. Well, first of all, this is a very full day. This is a very committed person. and it's not necessarily tied to gender, which is great. All right, let's try man. Describe the life, a day in the life of the man. Ah, very similar. Similar to my previous response, it's important to approach descriptions of individuals based on gender with sensitivity. And then it goes through. And it's not, doesn't seem to be that informed by the fact that it's man. Huh. So that's been shaped by the reinforcement from learning feedback. Let's try something more subtle to see if we can detect bias still in the model. Let's try, let's go and try an uncertain reference, a pronoun ambiguity. So pronoun ambiguity, I'm going to say to it, please complete the following sentence. The carpenter always asks the librarian for help because he. Now it's unclear. The he, does it refer to the carpenter or to the librarian? So the carpenter always asks the librarian for help because he values the librarian's vast knowledge. So when we say he, it assumes that it is the carpenter. Let's reshape. Please complete the following sentence. The carpenter always asks the librarian for help because she possesses a wealth of information. So yes, the bias is still in there. It's just that the responses now have been shaped. But don't be fooled that learning is quite literally deeply encoded here in the weights in that feed-forward network, and there is no getting it out. It's part of the view of the world of the model, and this is where those deep issues come from with how do we train the models and what data do we choose to train the models on. It has a profound effect on how the model sees the world. So reinforcement learning feedback makes things safer. It mitigates the problem. So if we're doing something that's obvious, it might shape its response. The subtle things are still there. So if models are used to make hiring decisions or any host of a host of different decisions, know that that bias is still there. This is an area of active research. This is not a problem that is going to be easily solved. So any questions about reinforcement from learning feedback and bias in models? Does the quantity of data matter most in establishing the bias? If it is large relative to the other corpus, the rest of the corpus, then yes. So it has to be enough, and so there's a signal. If it's a one-off, so think of all of the misspellings, right? That are all over the place. Those misspellings tend to not show up in the generated text because misspellings are random enough and they're infrequent enough that the model knows the correct way to spell words. If it were true with bias, that it were happened only a little bit, it would never learn it. But of course, as we know, that's not the case. It's all over the place. It's in our culture and it's in other cultures as well. Not just gender bias, but biases of all types. So whatever is predominant will show up in the model. Great question. Other questions? All right. Then let's go ahead and talk about integrity now. So one of the things that first occurs to us with these models is that they're great at writing, and therefore we could use it to help with writing. The fact is, though, that the models are they're getting better, but in terms of long form writing, they're not great, and they also have other shortcomings. So let's go ahead and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of things. I I'd like to use this model sort of help me with this presentation. So, and I can show you actually the notes that I used for this presentation. So when I do a presentation, I'll write out some things, but generally I'll have short little sentences, and you can say even read just a little bit of this, and that's how I do my presentations. One way that we can use models certainly is to ask it to give us feedback on this. So for example, you can say, I'm going to give you my full presentation, all the notes I have on it, and then give me feedback. And actually, you can get much more sophisticated than this. You can say, I am presenting to a group of faculty at Vanderbilt University from various fields. Give me feedback on what I might be missing. You can even ask, given this presentation, what are the toughest questions that they may ask me? So when we do that, give it all the information, that's all the notes that you just saw that I had up there. It comes back and it gives you not too bad. Here's some points for consideration: missing topics, transparency and explainability. Okay, but it's kind of funny. The model doesn't know a whole lot about itself, because transparency and explainability is not going to happen, especially with GPT-4. Data provenance, not bad idea. Accessibility and inclusivity, not a bad idea, not enough time to do it. Quality control and evaluation metrics. These scores that it's talking about are older. So not bad feedback. And it gives me feedback on specific things for my existing. So not bad, but even know that with this, the models have limitations. Their knowledge ended at the end of their training. This model ended its training in September of 2021. A lot has happened since 2021. And now it's referring to things that really are passé. We don't really talk about blue when we're talking about generative AI anymore. So that's always something to keep in mind. But suggestions for existing topics, not bad. But what if we go further? So that's a good use. But what if we step over the line? Make a presentation for me on best practices in using AI, touching on hallucinations, bias, integrity, and intellectual property, targeted primarily. I did an earlier one that was targeted to undergraduate students, make it approachable and fun. It'll do it. Of course, there are serious ethical issues with doing this, and there are practical issues too. So it's not bad. But again, it's drawing on older information, and really you have to do a lot of work to make it more than just kind of bland. This will get better, but of course you didn't author it. As a matter of fact, the only thing that you did is the prompt, right? And it's not even that long of a prompt. So we have a continuum here, right? You can go all the way to simply edit what I have, or give me feedback, or give me a good idea of what tough questions people might ask me, all the way to writing it. So you, just like your students, sort of have to figure out where that line is, and where it's appropriate for you and where it's appropriate for your students. One exercise that I've loved, and this was, and I'm trying to remember who did this. It was in English, and if one of you did this, please speak up. They gave an assignment. This was early on. Gave an assignment, say, do use ChatGPT to write your essay. But then I want you to grade the essay using the rubric that we use with all of our other writing. Pick it apart. Point out where it's good writing, where it's poor writing, how it needs to improve its writing, which I loved. So just know that there are, a continuum here, but know that it has a valuable place in providing feedback. The feedback doesn't just have to be about presentations. You can absolutely do this with grant proposals as well. I'm going to be submitting the following grant to NEH. I believe the following people will be on the following people with following backgrounds will be on the review panel. Give me feedback on what do you think are the strongest, the weakest parts. Give me an estimate of what you think the score might be. Now, this is just going to be a best guess, but at least it will give you feedback on whether you might be pitching it to the wrong people, whether it may or may not mesh well, or you might be able to reword, or you might be able to retarget to specifically match the call. That's certainly something that we've assisted people with. Again, we're on this side of the line. We're asking for feedback. We're not writing using it, but we're using it very much as a persona to do an analysis of what we've done to see if we might need to iterate more. Questions about these kinds of uses of these models? And feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand and unmute. All right, let's talk about security and data privacy. If you pay for Chat GPT, then you're on what's called the Chat Plus plan. And if you're on the Chat Plus plan, you can click on settings down here. You can go to beta features, and you can turn on what is now called, as of the middle of this week, advanced data analysis. This used to be called code interpreter. It is a remarkably powerful tool. It's not just for data analysis. It really it gives the model an ability to figure out what you need and to write code to give you what you need. Think of it like a meta tool. Jules White, with whom I've written some papers on various things around generative AI, and who heads up our future learning initiative here in generative AI at Vanderbilt, has a great analogy that he uses. So he says, ADA, advanced data analysis, ADA is like a shovel. You're holding a shovel to dig a hole in the ground. The shovel notices that there's a huge rock in your way. So it jumps out of your hand, turns itself into a pickaxe, bangs at the rock until it's broken up, jumps back into your hand and turns back into a shovel. So that's what's happening with ADA. You're chatting with the model, you ask it for something, it realizes it can't really do that, but it knows how to write code to do it. So it takes a step back, writes code, comes up with a solution, and gives you the solution, and then enters the chat again. It's a remarkable thing to see. And we have workshops on it. We're going to have more workshops on this in just a few weeks, so I hope that you'll join us for that. But there's something that's more relevant for us in this discussion. Let me show you what this is. When you click on New Chat, you click on GPT-4 and you say, hey, yeah, turn on ADA. You'll notice here that a plus sign appears. This plus sign is an indication that you can upload files. You can upload zip files, you can upload data files. And if you were to do that, then it will give you an analysis of the data that you've uploaded. This can be almost anything, but often spreadsheets are a great thing to upload. So for example, if you wanted to do an analysis of the grades that your students have, maybe broken down by their year in school, by their college, by their minor, this would absolutely be able to do a complete analysis, give you graphics, maybe even build a predictive model, maybe taking a look at all of your other assignments. Does this make anybody uncomfortable, the idea of uploading the grades here? Anybody see any possible issues with uploading grades and students' names?
Well, that stuff.
Yeah, I like being here at the university. I do not want my appointment here to end. That's a huge FERPA violation. Absolutely. It is absolutely an issue, because when you're uploading, this is not running locally. This is uploading to OpenAI servers. So first of all, you just have the blatant FERPA violation because you're sending the data someplace else. All right, but that aside, what else could possibly go wrong? Well, any data that you put in here and any data that you upload when you're in the web interface can be used for model training. So that means OpenAI will hang on to this data. They may very well use this data to train future versions of the model. Future versions of the model may get larger. They may get much better at memorizing information, which means that that spreadsheet of the person's grade and their name and all the information may be learned by the model. And so some point in the future, they may say, do you have any information on grades from Jesse Spencer Smith? Why, yes, Jesse Spencer Smith got a D in the prompt engineering class. So you can absolutely have data exposure and data leakage. But even if that doesn't happen, so we have massive FERPA violation, you have exposure because from the model, you also have an issue where you might have exposure just from the interface itself. OpenAI has had an incident before where prompts from other people became visible to other users. They fixed that, but they've had one data breach like that. They could have another. So what do? Well, we are looking into solutions that will be for Vanderbilt and will be safe for research data and will be safe for use with educational data, but it's not in place yet. So if you're using ChatGPT, you always have to keep in mind that you really are just like sending things to other people's computers. Remember, it might be used for training data in the future. All of these things are what you should be aware of and keep in mind. So one solution is, we're working on getting an enterprise solution which is safe and secure. Two, if you need something now, come and talk to us at the Data Science Institute. We are also looking into running 4 different researchers' local versions of models that are about as capable as GPT 3.5, not quite as capable as GPT 4, and it will not have ADA in it, but still you'd be able to do very secure on-premise ChatGPT level type work with it. But this is something we'd have to stand up for you. Come and talk to us and we'll see what we might be able to work out. Any questions about security and data privacy or the lack thereof when using when using ChatGPT from OpenAI at OpenAI? So good question. How much does people uploading erroneous data impact training? Not immensely. There's actually a fair amount of bad information that goes in. If it's massive, it could be an issue. So that is, and also there's a lot of pre-processing on the data as well. So it will move it, but these models are, ChatGPT is 175 billion parameters. It's a lot of parameters to move. So each individual data, file doesn't move it that much. So it's not going to break it. But also as you're training, you keep track of whether specific data sources cause you trouble. And absolutely you can pull those data sources out. And Linda, you said you could upload grades without any personal information, just like student 1, student 2, student 3, no names, no ID number, no SSN, nothing. You can. You have to be careful that there's no additional information because data could be re-identified. So you have to be careful you don't have enough information to be re-identified. But if it's truly anonymous, then that would be another possibility. If you have questions about this, definitely reach out to VUIT. One thing that I will do is that I will, if I have something that's sensitive, I will ask ChatGPT. I'll tell it all about the data that I want, the headers, the properties of the data, and I'll say, make up fake data for me. And then I'll do all my analysis and I'll say, now give me all the code. And then I'll run the code locally where it's secure. So that's something else you can do. It requires a little bit more work and some more skill. If you're interested in that, let us know. We have OpenAI drop-in hours every Friday, 10 to 12. If you want to do something like that, where you want to work with synthetic data, and then you do everything safely locally. There's a great question about NIH example. Aren't you exposing the NIH proposal? Sure are. Absolutely. Now, if you get funded, it's going to be out there in public anyway. But if you're concerned about and you want to keep things really close to the chest, then that's when you're going to want to wait for the secure enterprise version of either OpenAI or Microsoft running something like GPT-4 that we'll have in place, or possibly locally running Llama. Llama is not going to be as good as Llama V2 is not going to be as good as GPT-4 at doing these kinds of reviews that I was talking about. So yeah, your choice would be wait or do it with something a little bit less powerful. Great. Other questions? Then let's finish talking about, by talking about copyright. So don't have anything to show on this. So let me just turn off the screen share. So creating things with AI poses an interesting problem. So if you create something with AI, is that yours? So it really depends on how much you contributed. So the US Copyright Office very early on stated that with all AI and human creative collaborations, authorship is not extended to non-humans. So that means, in the clearest example, if you just type in a prompt and generative AI then generates a written, an image, a musical work, code, generates something, then the traditional elements of authorship have not been met by you. Instead, they've been met by the AI, which is inhuman, which means it cannot be protected by copyright. And they don't care what the prompt is. This, especially around code, this is not the right answer for code, because the prompt matters a great deal when you're creating code and for these other things as well. But the point is, you cannot copyright it. They're very clear about this. They've recently, if anything, strengthened their view. And the federal courts have now also affirmed the U.S. Copyright Office position. So it looks like this is likely to stand, that AI generated work cannot be copyrighted. So then it's just going to be a battle over how much was generated and how much was yours. Not an easy question to answer, and not one that the Copyright Office is certainly going to be moving on anytime soon. So any questions do you have about copyright? I'm not a copyright lawyer, but I can simply tell you this little bit that I'm aware of with copyright. Do know, of course, we have Office of the Counsel, General Counsel here at Vanderbilt, and also we have the Technology Transfer Office, which can also talk to you specifically about IP, ownership, and copyright. Those would be the people to go to. This is just me waving the red flag. All right, then let me end, and please put it in the chat if you have any questions. Let me finish up just by sharing a few resources that we have that I want to make sure that you know about. So here we go. So first of all, you signed up for this workshop, so you probably already know about the other workshops, but just in case, know that we're going to be talking about Ada, using this powerful tool, this meta tool, to do analysis and to do problem solving. We're going to be talking about image generation and computer programming with AI for non-programmers. You don't have to know how to program to create really good programs, computer programs now. So please join us for that. You can just go to DSI workshops and sign up for our workshops. See that we have a question. What is recommended source for understanding the difference between LLMs, pros and cons, and what are they better at accomplishing? That is a great question. And I'll tell you what, I will finish up here and I will stick around and be able to answer some questions. We do have workshops that will be coming up. I'll also mention that we have, if you want to go deep into this, we have our AI winter. We have an AI summer that's 4 weeks, and we have an AI winter, which is 4 days. And it was intended to be funny if you know what an AI winter is. But in that, we go very deeply into these different models and in the strengths and weaknesses. But I'll spend some time right after this to answer that question. So stick around if you want to learn more about the difference between Bing, Bard, Llama, ChatGPT, GPT-4, all of those. Final resource that I'll mention is going to be our weekly newsletter. If you've not already signed up for the newsletter, suggest that you do. This is how you'll find out about AI winter, AI summer, the semester-long Transformer class, which you as a faculty are welcome to come and sit in on. I teach it every semester. If you're interested in diving into the theory there, please join us. But sign up for the newsletter. You can find out about all the upcoming events that we have. Any final questions before we end this session and I just move into answering the question about LLMs? Any final questions? All right, thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everybody. If you're interested in learning more about the difference between LLMs, stick around. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Glad you joined us. Excellent. So, Nathan, did you have specific questions about specific LLMs, or do you want me to give you like a broad overview of all of them, like a 2-minute summary? What would you like?
I don't have a specific questions. I just, I'm most familiar with OpenAI's offerings. And I know that there are some, I think, recently a version of Llama that was released it as code generation specific. But beyond that, and like just other integrations like what Microsoft is trying to do, I guess more general context on the like approaches,
Absolutely. Yeah. So
can I add? Oh
yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna add on to that. Like, which ones are free, which ones cost, and is it worth paying for them, and what? Yeah.
Great questions. Well, let's start with OpenAI. So OpenAI does have sort of a free tier, and it gets you ChatGPT and some GPT-4. It does not get you Ada. It does not give you that meta tool that I talked about, the shovel that turns into the pickaxe. It does not give you that. You're also limited in how many of the GPT-4 you have, plus any interactions with it, of course, can be used for training. So it's a closed source model. You're going to have to be willing to share your data. Next step up from that is Chat Plus, which gives you pretty much all of the GPT-4 that you might want. It gives you Ada, the ability to upload files and to do really good analysis and also other problem solving with Ada. It also gives you some access, what's called API access as well. So that's sort of the next for that. Also in sort of that space, very similar to GPT-4, is the offering from Microsoft, which is Bing Chat. Bing Chat is a version of GPT-4 which does not have Ada, but does have access to the internet that we talked about, sort of mitigate that problem of hallucination. So when you search with Bing, it's going to be always doing searches on the internet. So it has the internet tool, and that will mitigate the problem of hallucinations, of giving you factually incorrect information. Then we have Google, and they have Bard, which has one of their very large models on the back end. Also, you're sharing data there. It does have some file uploads as well. It's been trained more recently than any of the ChatGPT or GPT-4. Its training ended, I think, about 6 months ago, so fairly recent. So it knows more recent things. It too can do web lookup. Plus, it knows computer languages that are used with Android really well. I just discovered this. So it knows different computer languages really well. Then we have from another company called Anthropic, something called Claude, and they're in version 2 right now. Claude is important because it has an extremely long context length. Its context length, in other words, how much it can attend to, is 100,000 tokens. That's like 75,000 words. That's like a book. It's multiple papers. So if you want to chat with a model about different papers, compare and contrast this approach to this approach. What's missing from here to here? What's new? Or given these 5 papers, help me think through how I might. Then Claude is for you. Extremely long context. Claude is also very good at programming. In terms of programming and AI generative programming, GPT-4 is very good. Claude is also good. The others are not bad, but they're just not as good. Then you have the completely free and open source models, which can be run either on a place called Hugging Face. So it's huggingface.co. And maybe Miranda, if you could put that link in the chat. Or you could run them locally as well. These range from smaller models like 7 billion parameters, which you could run on a beefy laptop, which has a GPU in it. So maybe like a gaming laptop or a Mac M1 or M2, up to the 70 billion, which is only going to run on the beefiest machines. But those you can run locally. So it's completely secure. You can do additional training on them. New versions of these models are being generated all the time. So Nathan, you just mentioned the Code Llama. It's actually really good at coding. It's better than ChatGPT, almost as good as GPT-4 in some cases, and on par as far as Python goes in GPT-4. But know that these are always, you have different winners at different times. They're always doing additional training. Like the last time I tried to get GPT-4 to hallucinate, they've done reinforcement learning from human feedback since the last time I did that. And so it's better at certain things. Same thing with additional training on code as well. So if you have
Yeah,
a
no,
specific
that's
question,
very helpful. That's exactly what I was the kind of
great.
thing that I was looking for. So
Great. And know that you can always stop by. So we have open door here. We're at 19th and Grand. You can find out if you sign up for our newsletter. Drop in 10 to 12 on Fridays.
okay,
All
great.
right.
Thank you so much. This is very informative.
Excellent. Glad you were here. All right. And any other final questions? Oh, let me go and unmute you. There you go. Yeah. Oh.
Turn video on, but not talking. Yeah. No, I got here late, so I missed the beginning, but
Oh,
yeah, I was wondering, did you I didn't know about this learning, whatever you call it, reciprocal, the way it learns from the questions that you're asking. Do those, remember the images? Has it learned on that?
they've done reinforcement learning on it. So
Reinforcement learning?
now when you do that, some reinforcement learning, plus you're just cheating. So so what they do is they take your prompt, and if you
Yeah.
say woman, now what they do is they add additional wording to steer it away. So that's one way that they've done it. And then they've done some work on their prompt. And you know what was so funny? I was looking for those images to
Yeah.
use it as an example here, and I can't find them. I do, and I was
Oh,
thinking of you.
no.
It's like, yeah, it's in some presentation someplace, but I just couldn't find it. So I just, I'll have to keep on looking because it
Okay.
was such a good example.
Like the newsletter images or the
Yeah,
ones that I have the newsletter,
the news. I didn't think of that. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, my president. Of course, the
but you
newsletter.
had that presentation that had a
I
bunch of.
know, which had also the later ones as well.
Yeah.
And the interesting point about the later ones was even when we tried to steer it, it
Yeah.
just wouldn't. It's like, no, professionally dressed. You mean low cut professionally dressed?
Yeah.
No,
No.
I mean just professionally
Victorian.
dressed. Right. And then it was like, right, exactly. Then it turned Victorian. So now it's better, but it's
Okay.
important to remember this is all mitigated. It's still there.
Yeah.
If you're building solutions, like especially if you're building solutions that are based on the embeddings that come from these models, there is no reinforcement learning around that.
Yeah.
So then this is a lot of people think, hey, we've solved this because we have reinforcement learning feedback, and no, it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. All right,
Take
and we
care.
will have a recording of this as well if you want to go back and see the.
Oh, great. Okay.
We talked about hallucinations
Yeah.
and kind of where they come from.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Good to see you again.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.